we put it on ourselves to tell the story of Ben's life. And his family was gracious enough to trust us with that story, which we're forever honored by. But having the weight of that on your shoulders was definitely something that was always in the back of our heads. And so it completely rocked the community when that happened. I mean, I remember filming before Ben's accident and then filming after Ben's accident and feeling a visceral shift in the tone of that town. Being able to help keep the memory of their son alive, it's been really special. That's one of the most rewarding parts of making a documentary, in my opinion, is just meeting all these new people and hearing all these new stories and gaining a new perspective, really. On not only your subject matter, but just learning more about life.
That's Jack Murgatroyd, the latest guest on the Jalapeno. Jack and I recorded this a few months back. I'm happy to share it here today. Jack is a filmmaker, having been involved in various capacities on films over the years as an editor, producer, director, you name it. Most notably on a documentary called Dirty Old Wedge, which came out in 2016, and his latest, which we talk about today, Part of Water, about a fallen lifeguard named Ben Carlson from Newport Beach, California, which came out in the summer of 2019. Part of Water. Jack grew up in Southern California with a love for film and passion for surfing, getting his debut as a filmmaker as a kid, filming his friends out on the water, and he followed that intuition into college and up to today. And happy to share this conversation with Jack Murgatroyd. This is Ty, your host, wishing everyone out there all the patience and hope to push through this strange time, this strange COVID-19 time that we're in. Be well out there, everybody. And here we go with filmmaker Jack Murgatroyd.
And so when it came time to applying to colleges, I only applied to film schools, kind of thinking like I could make this a career. So I applied to USC. I thought that was way out of my league. I thought there's no chance, but I somehow got in there. And so, I went to SC for film school, which was a great experience.
Through the cracks.
Snuck through the cracks somehow. Me and you met there, which was awesome. And, so right when I got out of school, I was kind of faced with this question of whether or not I wanted to go get, like a real job, quote unquote, in film and go work for like a production company and be an assistant and do like errands and pick up phone calls and kind of like do that sort of stuff. Or do I want to like try to make it on my own and just start making stuff? And, our mutual buddy, Edwin, Toby Eversole, we went to the film school together. We made a couple projects in school that people kind of liked and got people talking. And so right when we got out, we had, friends starting their own companies that wanted to do some video stuff, or friends that went and worked for, some smaller startups and they needed video work and they kind of came our way. And so we're lucky that we were kind of busy right when we got out making stuff, which was really exciting for us because we, probably more than half of our friends went and did the assistant route, and they would just be complaining about their bosses and the crap that they had to do and having no fun. And, Edwin and I were out kind of traveling around making these super low budget, not the best quality kind of stuff, but having experiences and having fun making these things. And so that I think that kind of set me down this path that eventually has kind of led to the documentary work that I've been kind of leaning into more recently. And so I know you mentioned Dirty Old Wedge at the start of this, but so that was my first film that I did. Edwin was involved in that. It was a surf film about this big wave spot in Newport called the Wedge, if you're not familiar with it. But we partnered with this guy, Tim Burnham, who's also my partner on the most recent film, Part of Water. But that was like this weird happenstance, like luck, honestly, of kind of how that came about. He was a friend of a friend, was making a documentary about the Wedge, but had never made a film, didn't know anything about filmmaking, but he was like, he knew the story. He knew all those guys. There's like a group of guys at the Wedge called the Wedge Crew, which is kind of like the locals there that kind of regulate the spot. They're all body surfers, which is kind of different and kind of like the surf world, that like body surfers would run a spot, but that's pretty unique to that wave. So he called us up, needed help making something. We were like 23 at the time. Surfing was kind of how both Edwin and I got into filmmaking. And so it just felt like this perfect fit. So we started that project. It took 3 years to make it, but learned just so much along the way as far as how to make a film from nothing, how to like make something look cool with no money, how to release a film and have people actually watch it, come see it. So yeah, that kind of started this new path of documentary work, which is where my career is headed. And it's been really cool to lean into that and start doing cooler and bigger projects.
Yeah. I want to back up a little bit, but your point about the convention or the safe play would have been to go be a production assistant on, working for a company that's doing projects that you have nothing to do with in terms of making the decisions on those projects. But, in theory, it's safer to get the paying job as a production assistant and then kind of work your way up when you get permission to. But what you guys did was you kind of just jumped in the deep end. And as a result, all of a sudden you're making things on your own volition. You're making executive decisions, whether it's a low budget or a humongous budget. You're still getting that practice in making decisions and seeing the results of those decisions for better or worse. And it's interesting that was your choice, and then it has seemed to be a favorable decision in retrospect.
Yeah, looking back on it, and it's, now that I'm a little bit further down the road, like that choice, when I think about it, was kind of crazy. Like it wasn't something that Edwin and I fully thought out, I don't think. I think that we kind of had like a little bit of momentum coming out of film school. These projects were coming our way and we just didn't want to say no. And so we wanted to just keep doing them. And as they kept coming in, we just kept moving along. And then it's kind of crazy to think that we chose this path because, I don't know, I mean, it could have just gone so far south that it's great that it's kind of worked out along the way. I mean, we've definitely learned from a bajillion mistakes. We've gone down the wrong road 100 times. But it's been cool to be able to create stuff from the start. Because I mean, I have a lot of, I have friends from the film school that went the, production assistant, office assistant route, who are now starting cooler stuff, have a bit more authority and move up in their career. So that's been really cool to see. Yeah. But at the same time, those people didn't get to quite experience some of the stuff that we did as far as, I don't know, getting to travel the world a little bit, going on adventures with our filmmaking and kind of some of those cool things. So, I mean, part of me is kind of envious sometimes because we have to be on all the time. Like work doesn't really stop for us. So having like friends that get to clock out at 5 and go do whatever, sometimes it's like that seems like a more favorable route. But I think, now having some distance from it and looking back on, the decisions we made and the career path that we took, I really wouldn't choose any other way. It's been just a ton of fun. And I think we've learned so much, not only from the successes we've had, but from, some of the mistakes we've made too along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's dig into that. So you mentioned it took 3 years, I think 3 years for both of the documentaries that you're involved with. Yep. Is that expected timeline?
There's no hard and fast rules with filmmaking. There's documentaries that take, 10 years to make, but I'd say, generally it took a little bit longer for us to make both these films because they are like, true labors of love. We haven't, both were kind of like low budget, calling in all the favors we had to like make something as good as we possibly could. And so that took a lot of, working, like the first film, we had no budget basically. And so editing wise, we were doing it on the weekends, after our normal kind of like stuff was done for the day that we had to get through for clients that were paying. So it took so much more time because we just, we couldn't pay ourselves. So like we had to put food on the table another way. So we had to take other jobs, which would take up our bandwidth, which would then kind of push the timeline further and further down the road. This most recent one, we had a bit more backing behind us. I think because of the success of the first one, people were more ready to get on board with helping to finance this one. The story that we told was something that hit really close to the Newport Beach community, which we can get into a little later. But people were, I think, a bit more excited to help us with this more recent one. So that was cool that we had a bit more budget. So we were able to pay ourselves a little bit to kind of like be able to, say no to other projects to free up time to like really focus on this. So this one went a bit more smooth, went a bit faster, I'd say. But with these projects, we don't have a big like brand paying us to like, have all the resources in the world to make this. So it's really about, pulling your own resources and pulling up your bootstraps and doing it on your own, which is, sometimes it gets a little tough because you don't have a lot of support, but in the same token, you have all the creative say and you get to craft the story the way that you want to. You don't have anyone else telling you what to do. So that's been, that's kind of the coolest part is we get to tell the story we want with these films.
Yeah. Yeah. And coming out of film school, how has the professional reality been different than what you expected in high school or college as you're preparing to be a filmmaker compared to what's actually happened?
I mean, I think when you're growing up as a high schooler or whatever, you have these grandiose dreams of, you're going to get out of college, you're going to have like a golden script, someone's going to give you a bunch of money to go make your first feature film, and you're going to be off the races, you're going to be the next Spielberg. And for some people, a very select few, that can happen. But for the rest of us, we kind of do get hit with like a rude awakening of like, you need to make money and no one's going to pay you to write a script right now. So you got to find a way to kind of like use your skills to bring in an income and to be able to keep the lights on. And so I think that Edwin and I, when we got out of school and started our company, it was kind of a great time to be going that route, the DIY, like start your own thing right out of school route, because technology had kind of reached a point where the barrier to entry was lower. You could buy like a DSLR Canon 5D sort of camera and have a professional, somewhat pretty professional look to your work at a pretty low cost compared to like the, maybe a generation before us where it was much more expensive to make stuff that looked a certain caliber. But yeah, when we got out, we would just take any odd jobs that we kind of could take. We were doing some cool stuff, like some music videos, and some cool commercial work, which was fun. But we were doing a bunch of work that was like, here's a Kickstarter video for like this guy's company. Here's, an event that's going on. They want someone to film it. So, it's only kind of more recently that we've been able to pick and choose our projects a little bit more, and do stuff that interests us rather than the paycheck sort of vibe.
Yeah. And that's that Hunt House.
Yeah. Hunt House Pictures is our company. Edwin and I kind of split duties as, heads of the company, the faces of the company, but we both direct. We do a lot of projects kind of separately now. We used to do everything kind of together. Now as projects come in, I'll kind of head up one, he'll head up the other, and we'll kind of split, divide and conquer sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's been really cool. We've been able to bring in a roster of directors that we represent, and we bring them work. So then kind of for those projects, we'll take on more of a producer role, just overseeing and making sure everything's going smoothly and interacting with the clients. So it's been cool to kind of see our company grow as well, where it went from us doing everything ourselves, being, a two-man band doing these little video projects, to now, overseeing teams and working with budgets that are, significant for us to be able to do stuff at a larger scale. So the evolution of our company has been kind of cool to watch over the past, 5 years or so.
Yeah. And from what you've learned along the way, what What part of the process do you gravitate towards mostly? Like if you could focus on one thing, what would it be?
And I think one of the cool things about the fact that we were just a two-man band for so long is that I got to learn kind of everything, because you have to be able to wear like every single hat in order to pull off these projects. But it's been cool to be able to see what I like and what I don't like through that process. And I think editing was kind of like a first love for me. I always love when a project's kind of done, we've shot it, and we can bring it into the editing room and make it the best thing that it possibly can be. And then more recently, I've gravitated towards directing and producing, and that's kind of where I'm putting all my energy these days.
Cool.
And that's been, yeah, I mean, it's been one of those things where as you continue to do it, you build more confidence, because I think as a younger filmmaker, there's this idea of like the director, and he's the guy with the bullhorn and in charge, and the captain of the ship that everyone needs to look to and needs to have all the answers. And that was intimidating, I think, for me, especially at first, to think that I was the guy that the project solely rested on. And I think having Edwin as my partner for so long in these projects, it was great for us to be able to direct things together and be able to bounce ideas off of each other and know that if I don't have the answer, he's gonna have the answer, or we'll figure it out together. Now, as we've gotten older and we've started to do projects more and more on our own, and I've had to find my voice more on my own. That's been a really interesting process, and one that I'm getting more and more confident with as my career progresses, and figuring out exactly kind of what my perspective is on my work and what I want to say. But that's been the most exciting part, is that as a director, it's become one of those things where it was something I kind of feared, being the person in charge, because everything rested on my shoulders. And now it's one of those things that I'm excited by, because I get to be the one that kind of puts my stamp on this, tell the story that I want to tell. And of course, like with filmmaking, it's such a collaborative art form that there's so many other kind of voices that get intermingled with mine, and it becomes the sum becomes greater than the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts.
Right.
But directing has become that thing that kind of it's what I want to be doing. It pushes me forward. It's the thing I'm most excited about, is being able to tell the stories that I'm interested in a way that I think is the most compelling, and gives the audience the best sense of what I'm trying to say.
How does the process work? I know there's no hard and fast rules, but let's say you and I had this great idea for a film, and what happens next?
Let's assume we're making a documentary, because that's kind of where my passions are right now. And it's really about kind of, once you find a story that you think is worth telling, the biggest thing that I've learned from the past two projects that I've made is really immersing yourself in whatever that world is, and being like as authentic and truthful as you can when going into that world. I think you can have an idea of kind of the story that you want to tell in your head, but it's not until you kind of meet all the people and learn all the characters and get a real feel for like what that world is, that you're in a position where you can actually tell that story. And so, like for instance, with Part of Water, which is, it's my latest documentary, which is about Ben Carlson, who was a lifeguard in Newport Beach, who gave his life to save a distressed swimmer a couple years ago. That movie, the way that we started it was so slow, in the sense that we knew that it was such a sensitive subject with the passing of someone, like a family lost their son, and so. With us, we took such a delicate approach to starting the film by having conversations with the family and with Ben's closest friends, and just getting a sense of whether this was something that they wanted to tell. and getting a sense of kind of who Ben was and like what the story was, and hearing from them about, you know, what they thought a film about him would be like. And so taking that like slow approach to immersing ourselves in that world, I think created such a more powerful film, rather than coming in with like, okay, this is a film about a guy who saved another guy, and we're just that's the story we're going to tell, and not taking the time to really understand like the intricacies and the like truth behind it. And so, yeah, as far as like continuing the process, then, you know, you get the cameras out, you raise some money, you shoot all the scenes that you feel like are going to tell the story best. And then you know, spend time editing it, and then a movie comes out of it magically. It's kind of a crazy process.
Yeah. And I imagine you mentioned, you know, the fear you had initially, the pressure of being the decision maker on a project that, you know, is involving a lot of people, and even if it's low budget, is still, you know, money on the line. And with that in the back of your head, you know, there's a lot weighing on you to make things happen, and to do it, you know, to orchestrate all of it, and then at the end of it, the goal being to tell a coherent story that is, as you say, worth telling. It's a tall order.
Yeah, and I think especially with this most recent film, you know, we put it on ourselves to tell the story of, you know, Ben's life. And his family was gracious enough to trust us with that story, which we're forever, you know, honored by. But having the weight of that on your shoulders was definitely something that was always in the back of our heads. And not only Ben's story, but we wanted to tell the story of lifeguards through Ben's story. And so knowing that lifeguards really hadn't gotten a fair shake in the public eye, that Baywatch was pretty much the only thing that the general public has ever seen about lifeguards, and us wanting to tell the real story of what these guys and gals do. Having kind of that on our shoulders was something that, you know, added a bit of pressure, but at the same time, a bit of motivation, because we knew that these lifeguards needed a bit more respect for what they do. It's not like, I feel like their profession largely is undervalued. And people generally have a disdain for lifeguards because they're normally the people telling you to not be in the wrong place in the ocean, and are kind of killing some of the fun at the beach on occasion. But yeah, I mean, having that pressure to like tell Ben's story too, like the story of, you know, we're kind of, you know, telling his legacy, was it was definitely something that added a bit of pressure. But with the film that we made, I think we couldn't be more stoked on kind of how it turned out, and the reaction we've gotten from not only the family but the community, and you know, kind of the greater public as it's been now released, and we're kind of seeing how people have been reacting to it and sharing the story.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great film, and congratulations again. The screening that I saw in Brooklyn at the White Hotel was so cool to see it live with your guys' live Q&A, and notice that there were, you know, 5 or 10 lifeguards from around the area that flocked to come see this film, and they had already knew about it through the ether, through the community, the national community of lifeguards, and you could tell how much they appreciate it, and they referenced how they were using it in their training videos in their, you know, New Jersey lifeguard school, you know, across the country. And the film just came out, and for me as an outsider to that world, it felt like a reassuring detail to see that live.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the coolest things that's come from this film is the reactions we've been getting from lifeguard agencies like around the world. Like, we've had people reach out to us from lifeguarding agencies in New Zealand, in Australia. Like you said, like at the New York premiere, we had people coming in from New Jersey, and kind of hearing, you know, the reassurances that they've sent us, and the kind notes that they've sent us, just, you know, feeling that they finally have been represented in a way that they feel proud of, and they feel like, you know, validated. I think that someone is, you know, that we as filmmakers kind of portrayed their profession the way that they see it, and like has spent the time to give them the respect that, we like, as a kid that grew up at the beach and has had that as a part of his life forever. I've always had a deep respect for lifeguards, but as a person who even grew up an hour inland, coming to the beach, occasionally on the weekends, like you probably don't see lifeguards as much, and you don't have that same, viewpoint of them or knowledge about what they do. And so, having this film be able to spread that a little bit more, even if it gives, a couple of people a bit more respect for what these guys and gals do, I think we've done our job. And it's been great to hear that agencies around the world have been reaching out and feeling like that we know we got the message right. So that's been really cool for us.
That's awesome. And I'm definitely part of the audience that is, not really thinking about the intensity and seriousness with which they are taking their job as they have to. I mean, it's easy to overlook what they're doing because their job is, what looks like just sitting on the beach. But if you put yourself in their shoes, and what your film did so well is to put us in their shoes, as you realize this is extremely intense and nerve-wracking to even imagine when you're at the beach, to not just be hanging out, but to be head on a swivel, 9 or 10 hour shift, making sure that nobody gets into any trouble. And as you mentioned in the film, and as it was discussed afterwards, they get overlooked because if they do their job, then you don't, then nothing happens. As in a sense, nothing bad happens.
We touched on in the film, one of the most common misconceptions of what lifeguards do is they're supposed to like go save people. And yes, that is part of it, but their whole job is to prevent an accident from happening in the first place. So knowing kind of where the rip currents are, or knowing where the danger is, or just having an eye on kind of what's happening at the beach and stopping a tragedy from happening before it happens, that's 95% of their job. And obviously some things are unpreventable and it requires, a rescue and those guys, getting into action. But, like you touched on, the people don't quite understand that part of the profession. And so they think these guys are just up there on a tower getting a suntan, looking around, when in reality, they're kind of making sure that people are keeping out of bad areas and staying safe so that, there isn't a tragedy or there doesn't need to be a rescue. Their main job is to make sure that nothing goes wrong in the first place. Their job is to make sure if a kid goes into the wrong spot, or if there's a rip current and people are kind of drifting into that area or whatever it is, that they're stopping a tragedy before it happens.
Yeah.
Rather than reacting and waiting for a rescue to need to take place and them hopping into action at that point. If a lifeguard is doing their job correctly, there shouldn't be any rescues at the beach. They should be preventing it before it even happens.
Right. And there was one part in the film that really stuck out to me. Is I've forgotten the name of the lifeguard, but he references how he kind of likes the fact that there's no big celebration or parade when there is a rescue made. That it's just back to work, and it kind of speaks to the humility. Yeah, you may have just saved somebody's life, but maybe they thank you, maybe they're embarrassed that they even had to be saved. Either way, it's kind of a quick, okay, great, you're alive. I got to go back to work.
Yeah, it's that their profession is totally crazy in that sense. And I mean, I think anyone that's ever been rescued by a lifeguard probably has been pretty embarrassed by the fact that they had to get rescued. And so these guys and gals, like, they don't get thank you cards or appreciation, and they sure as hell don't get like a parade down the street. So it is really for them. It is about just getting back to work, and they might be the only one that knows that they saved that person's life, just them and that person. But it's not so much for them about the praise and all that. But I think they just find gratitude in knowing that they're keeping people safe and doing their job.
Yeah. And so how did you find out initially about Ben's story?
Yeah. So when we were making Dirty Old Wedge, our first film, we're obviously down in Newport a lot because that's where the film takes place. The Wedge is in Newport, Newport Beach for anyone that's on the East Coast.
Yeah. So Newport Beach, California, and the Wedge is a particularly gnarly, huge wave that the bravest of the brave dare to surf.
Yes, like a mutant, half man-made crazy wave that kind of ricochets off of this jetty and creates this like wedgy, crazy, extra big shore break wave that's pretty intense. So we're down there making that documentary. So we're filming all the time, and while in the middle of filming, Ben's tragedy happened. So he was a Newport Beach lifeguard. My co-director on Part of Water, Tim Burnham, he actually knew Ben just from kind of the Newport social circles. Tim lives down in Newport Beach. And so it like kind of like completely rocked the community when that happened. I mean, I remember filming kind of before Ben's accident and then filming after Ben's accident and feeling a visceral shift in the tone of that town in the months after that tragedy. And we didn't fully comprehend it at that point in time as like, this should be our next documentary, but it was just one of those things that kind of weighed on us and we knew was, such a tragedy. And then, so that happened in 2014. Ben's tragedy happened in 2014. Our first film, Dirty Old Wedge, came out in 2016. And right after it came out, we're obviously thinking about, okay, what's our next movie? We want to do this again. This is great. No matter how hard and low budget and sleepless nights that first film was, kind of after releasing it and seeing how much, people enjoyed it and how much fun it was getting to share the experience of our film with an audience, we knew that we wanted to do it again. And so we were racking our brains trying to figure out what we wanted to do. Should it be a surf thing again? Should we get away from surf? And then Tim was in line at a grocery store or something like that and was chatting with a buddy saying that he was, we were looking to figure out what our next film was. And the guy said, you should make a movie about Ben. And it kind of immediately clicked for Tim. He called me up and said, what about doing a film on Ben Carlson? And it immediately clicked for me. And it was just one of those things where it was like a gut, like, yes, I just knew kind of in my gut that like, this was going to be a powerful story to tell. It was a realm that hasn't, like, lifeguarding was a story that hasn't really been told, at least the right way in my mind. And so it just kind of like immediately checked all these boxes of things that I was kind of interested in as far as like my taste in storytelling. It centered around the beach, which is where my filmmaking career started. It was about, someone who was exemplary and special and the best at what he did. And I knew it was a story that had such a great effect on the community when it happened that I knew that sharing that story with the world, at least hoped that it would be able to have that same effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the tone, the shift in tone when the accident took place and the aftermath. What was that like?
It was one of those things where you can kind of just feel it as we walked around the streets that there was just something a little off. And I think we touch on this in the film. Lifeguards didn't quite get, too much respect before Ben's accident. But afterwards, it was pretty incredible to see the outpour of support and love for what these guys and gals do. And in the film, you can see that, right after Ben's tragedy happened, the whole entire lifeguard station at Newport was just lined with flowers. And people had really come out to show that they were supporting, not just Ben, but the whole entire lifeguard agency there. And so it's been cool to see that through Ben's tragedy, there's been a bit of a silver lining, especially in the Newport Beach community, but hopefully, with this film as well, hopefully, it grows around the world that people start to see a little bit more about what lifeguards do, have a bit more respect for, what they do, and maybe give them a thank you or stop by their tower to, just acknowledge that, that they're that they're happy they're there,
Yeah.
watching over the beach and just paying them a little bit more respect.
Yeah.
That was something that immediately happened in Newport after Ben's tragedy, and we hope kind of with this film that message can spread a little bit further.
Having approached such a tragic, sensitive story, and you mentioned earlier working directly with the family and making sure they were okay with, first of all, with you telling it, but also being part of decision making around how it was told. What was that experience like, engaging with the family of a family who's just lost someone?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly tough, but such an amazing experience all at the same time. Tim and I have become incredibly close with Ben's family through this film. And we could not be more grateful for them opening their arms to us and letting us in on their story and their family, and letting us, tell the story of Ben and trusting us to do it. But it all came like very slowly and very delicately. I mean, we, when doing these interviews, you're essentially asking, not only Ben's family, but Ben's friends and those close to him to relive, one of the toughest memories of their entire life. For Ben's family, it's obviously the hardest thing that they've ever been through. And so being extremely, respectful of that, and kind of knowing that we needed to tread lightly and make sure that they felt comfortable with opening up to us. Things that put such an emphasis on making sure that they felt like they were in a space that they could openly talk about what happened. And that was one of the most delicate and challenging is not the right word, but it's one of those things as a filmmaker that you just knew that you had to do it right. And so it's been amazing for us now, having been through this experience with Ben's family, to be able to connect with them through this filmmaking process and feel like we're, in a way, kind of part of their family, or at least part of telling the story of their family, and getting to know, Ben's sister and brother-in-law, Jake, and hanging out with Ben's parents all the time. Like, they came out to the premiere in New York that you were at. It's been really special being able to help keep the memory of their son alive in a way. And so, I mean, yeah, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences as a filmmaker that I've ever had is being able to be a part of telling their story. And I think that's one of the coolest things too about documentary filmmaking, is that you really are becoming a part of this new world that you weren't a part of before. Writing a script and making a movie that way is amazing, and that's something that I'm definitely interested in down the road. But this experience of being able to embed and become part of the story yourself, with these new relationships and new people and new experiences, that's one of the most rewarding parts of making a documentary, in my opinion, is just meeting all these new people and hearing all these new stories and gaining a new perspective, really, on not only your subject matter, but just learning more about life.
Right. I imagine that's incredibly fulfilling and a great tribute to Ben, and obviously a tragic story, but through the work that you've done, you are paying homage to what seems like a wonderful guy who had an exemplary life in the way that he carried himself and the way he dedicated himself to the values that mattered to him. And bigger than just that story, and what I appreciate so much about the film is what his story represents. A lot of the media that you see today is very divisive and self-promoting or What I liked about your film is through Ben's story, you are trumpeting the themes that I don't think I really talked about enough today of community and service and selflessness and humility and all these things that Ben exemplified through his life. And in so doing, I think you're shining a light on a worthy side of humanity that isn't getting that light all that much these days. And to do so with a true story, to your point about documentary, is I think even more powerful because it's referenceable. It's certainly relatable to the community, to the Newport Beach community, but it's easily relatable across the country, across the world, for people who can relate to the service providers, whether it's a lifeguard or policeman or fireman or woman in their own communities. So I think your work through this film is incredibly valuable as well, because you brought the story to people who otherwise probably never would have heard it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. That's 100% kind of what we were hoping this film would do. And getting back to kind of what I was saying earlier with, my career trajectory and taking on the role of being a director and finding the stories that I want to tell, I think, through this documentary especially, my work, I feel like, is best tailored to finding these human experiences that can draw people together. And shine a light on the shared human experience and the things that we all go through that make us similar rather than pushing us apart. And so it's been great to kind of be able to tell Ben's story and share what happened with his community, with his tragedy, bringing people together from all walks of life. If you see the film, there's a paddle out after Ben's tragedy where like 3,000 people showed up. It was the biggest paddle out I've ever seen. And so these things that kind of bring us together as a community and remind us that we're all a bit more similar than we think we are, sharing those stories, I think, is where I want my work to continue to head.
Yeah. Amen, man. That's awesome. And a paddle out for listeners that are not in the surf community. Can you explain that?
In the surfing world, when someone passes away, as a ceremony or a celebration of life, people will all get on their boards and paddle out into the ocean, a couple 100 yards, form a circle, and kind of, share stories about the person who passed away and just take a moment to remember him or her. And this happens, in the surf world, this happens pretty frequently when anyone that's a big waterman or waterwoman man dies. And I've been a part of a few, and I've been a part of a few that I thought were somewhat big with, maybe 100 people, 50 people, 100 people. But with Ben's, it was like it looked like all of Newport Beach came out. One of the most touching and inspirational parts of our film for sure is seeing how the community rallied together in the wake of his tragedy.
Yeah, really beautiful. And congratulations again, and thanks for making it. Where can we watch it now?
Yeah, so we have it. It's up on iTunes and Amazon Video and pretty much anywhere you can find or anywhere you can buy or rent a film. You can find it there. So I would encourage anyone to check it out, and you can connect.
Part of Water.
Yeah, Part of Water, and you can follow us on Instagram at Part of Water, and we'd love to hear what you guys think of it, and feel free to reach out and tell us what you think.
Cool. Yeah, and then so moving on, what have you learned? I guess what have you learned from the Dirty Old Wedge and Part of Water that you'll carry with you in your back pocket for your next adventure?
What I've come to learn is that it's all about telling human stories. I mean, for my work, it's all about connecting it back to people. We wanted to tell the story of lifeguards through Ben. For me and my work, it's really all about exploring the people that are behind these things. And I think that's something that's going to permeate throughout, the rest of my work forever, is really connecting with the people that make up these communities and telling their stories to the best of my abilities.
I love that. Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, you go in, you have kind of an idea for what you might want to tell, but then the second you become immersed with the people that were directly involved, you realize the complexity, the nuances of the reality, and then you're sort of you're evolving the story based on what you're learning from the source. I think that's an important detail that you mentioned earlier about being open-minded about what unfolds rather than having your mind made up beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the coolest parts about documentary filmmaking is the story is constantly evolving and you're constantly figuring out as you go. And at some point you almost become part of the story. And that's, I think that's what makes it so interesting and fun and challenging, and something that I want to keep, pursuing.
And then before we go, Jack, and thanks for your time tonight. What advice do you have for aspiring filmmakers?
I think the biggest piece of advice is that you just have to start making stuff. And I know I have gotten that piece of advice when I was younger, and I thought it was kind of bullshit and I hated it. But there's a point in my career where I thought everything was going to come to me, things were going my way, and the work just stopped. And it was probably one of the most depressing times in my career because just nothing was happening. And then you take a first step and you decide, I'm going to go make something, even if it has no money behind it, even if there's no one that wants to be a part of it with you. You just have to start making stuff. And as you make stuff, you're going to learn more. As you make stuff, more people are going to see it. More people are going to get behind you. And through that, you're going to find your voice. And then all of a sudden, you're making the stuff that you want to make. So I think biggest piece of advice by far is don't sit there and wait for anything to come to you. You have to go make it for yourself and just keep making it. And if you're not getting paid right away, just keep making stuff. And eventually you're going to find the projects that are going to get you the income that you want and are also going to fulfill you creatively. The most rewarding parts of my career are when I get to show my movies to an audience and be there to see how they react. And for us to all experience the film together. That's by far the most rewarding and coolest things for me about what I do. And I hope that I, get to continue to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen, man. And I think what is so cool about your movie is that it is the beginning of, not only more work ahead for you, I'm sure, and more interesting stories to be told, but also, speaking for Part of Water specifically, is that it's the beginning of a conversation for a lot of people, which I think is important. And again, a meaningful and I think an essential conversation for our society, one of selflessness and humility and contribution to the community, not about fame or fortune necessarily as it's talked about normally, but about something deeper and more compelling about us as humans, which Ben represented.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that you took that away from our film. It was an incredible experience, and thank you for coming out. When we did the New York one, that was awesome to get to hang.
Great, I loved it. Well, I'm rooting for you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next. And congratulations.
Thank you for having me on, and I'm a big fan of the podcast that you got here, and thanks for making me a part of it.
Yeah, honored to have you on, and congratulations again. And thanks for your time.
Good talking, buddy.
You too, man. See ya. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. That's it for this episode. Thank you to Aaron for the sound design, Caitlin Watkins for the artwork. Thank you, CF Watkins, Nave Especial, and Super Yama Band for the music. Thanks again for everyone tuning in. Feel free to give us a rating, commentary if you feel so inclined. We'll connect again with you soon on the Jalapeno Podcast. Take care. On we go.